In the Bible, there is a story that tells us the importance of the decision that we make to follow God, and how there are going to be options to go elsewhere. In the book of Joshua, in the 24th and final chapter, we will find an occasion when the tribes of Israel were called upon to make such a decision. And we will start at the first verse. Joshua chapter 24, verse 1. And it reads, Then Joshua gathered all the tribes of Israel to Shechem and called for the elders of Israel, for their heads, for their judges, and for their officers. And they presented themselves before God. Here Joshua calls the elect group, from the tribes of Israel, to be presented before the Lord. In much of a way, we, like we are today, called to present ourselves before the Lord as an elect group of God's children. The same way. In verse 2, it explains how some of the forefathers had served other gods. And we'll go into that. Verse 2. In chapter 24 it says, And Joshua said to all the people, Thus says the Lord God of Israel, Your fathers, including Terah, the father of Abraham, and the father of Nahor, dwelt on the other side of the river in old times, and they served other gods. I love how God tells His people, that this happened in old times. He says that right there. Let's go back and review it. It says, and on the other side of the river in old times. Showing the importance of looking at today, and not thinking about where you came from. Now in verse 3, we see how with faith, the children of those who followed other gods, are brought out of that bondage by the strong hand of God. In verse 3. Then I took your father Abraham from the other side of the river, and led him throughout all the land of Canaan, and multiplied his descendants, and gave him Isaac. He says, I took. Read that. That's one, two little words that says, then I took. This is God speaking. Abraham didn't just get up and go, for no reason. He was guided by the mighty hand of God. In the next few verses, Joshua tells the children of Israel that God reminds them of just a few of the many miracles that He had done for them. But we're going to go on to verse 8, where there is something that is really important, to point out for what is to follow. Verse 8 of chapter 24 in the book of Joshua. And it reads, And I brought you into the land of the Amorites, who dwell on the other side of the Jordan. And they fought for you. They fought with you, But I gave them into your hand that you might possess their land. I destroyed them from before you. These are the Amorites. God reminds them of the Amorites, who were defeated with the help of God. And also in verse 11 goes on even further and mentions not only the Amorites, but 7 other nations that were, given into the hands of God's people. We'll read that in verse 11. Then you went over the Jordan and came to Jericho, and the men of Jericho fought against you. Also the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Girgashites, and the Hivites, and the Jebusites. And I delivered them into your hand. He says He delivered them into their hand. There they are again, those pesky Amorites. This is going to come along later. Before this time, the Lord delivered these same group of people, the Amorites, into the hands of the children of Israel. Once by drying up the Jordan River and weakening the spirits of the men of the Amorites. And another time by bringing upon them large hail, that killed more of the Israelites than with the sword of the Israelites did. And also with the hornet, it says, which we will see in the next verse, in verse 12. It says, I sent the hornet before you, which drove them out from before you. Also the 2 kings of the Amorites, but not with your sword or with your bow. You know, the last part of this verse explains the sheer force, you know, of the power of the Almighty. Because it was not by the sword or the bow. You know, it's not because, you know, it wasn't because they fought harder than the others. You know, it's not because the weapons that were bigger than their enemies. You know, if you're not going, if you are going to go against God's people, you know, it's not the people that you have to worry about. It's the mighty Maker's hand that will strike you down. And He not only saves us, you know, from the enemy, but He secures us by giving us all that we need to move forward. Verse 13. I have given you a land for which you did not labor, and cities which you did not build, and you dwell in them. You eat of the vineyards and olive groves which you did not plant,